Good evening. Good to see you guys. This is our course on the text that in English was translated by Jeffrey Hopkins, called The Practice of Emptiness, along with Geshe Repton. And as we have done before, we're going to begin with a recitation of the Heart Sutra, the Heart of Wisdom Sutra. With the help of Jennifer, Sunny's going to put up a revised edition that looks a little more clearer on the screen. So you could put that up, Sunny. There we go. And somehow I still see, how can I do this? How can I get rid of, there we go. So if you'd like to join me, thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharidvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly and completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tadyata, gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate buddhi, svaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas will rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharitvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. Okay. So everyone knows the Heart Sutra, right? If you are curious about the meaning of the Heart Sutra, you can go on to YouTube. I think I gave discourse on the Heart Sutra, I'm not sure, Guya Samaja Center, a couple of years ago. It's up on, there's a series of lectures explaining what all of those things mean. You know, you might be confused. Sounds like nothing exists, right? There's no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, and so forth. But what it means is that there's no inherently existing variety of those things. Nothing exists inherently. Okay. So we've reached the point of the text on the practice of the selflessness of persons. And this is just about where we ended last time, I think, right? The actual, right before the headline that says the practice of the selflessness of persons, there's a sentence that says the actual practice of the perfection of wisdom has two parts: the practice of the selflessness of persons and the practiceness of the selflessness of other phenomena, meaning phenomena that are other than persons themselves. So we've gone over that before, right? You kind of have an idea what that's talking about. So the practice of the selflessness of persons, the text says, with respect to the first, because it's talking about the outline, the first is of the two, selflessness of persons, selflessness of phenomena. So with respect to the first, selflessness of persons, there are many forms. For instance, the reasoning of dependent arising has 3 essentials, and the sevenfold reasoning has 9 essentials, and so forth. Did we talk about that last time? We mentioned that? Anyone remember? Okay. So what is this talking about? If you were to try to establish, prove that persons were empty of inherent existence, that would require some kind of logical, presentation, some logical argument, and some reasoning, in other words. So here it says there are many forms of, maybe I should say there are many forms of reasoning. For instance, that of dependent arising. So the reasoning of dependent arising is something that we'll only talk about sort of like indirectly right now, but it is called the king of reasonings. You might wonder why it's not called the queen of reasonings, but anyway, it's called the king of reasonings. It's because in one very simple statement, if you can establish that something is a dependent arising, and you have previously ascertained that anything that's a dependent arising is going to be empty of inherent existence, in one fell swoop, you can prove that phenomena is empty or selfless. So what is it? Dependent arising, again, just going to talk about just superficially here right now, because we're going to talk about some of the simpler reasonings to establish emptiness. Simpler in the sense that in order to use the reasoning of dependent arising, the king of reasonings, you have to have previously proved emptiness in some way. So what does it mean, dependent arising? In this case, it means that phenomena have no existence from their own side. They arise, or they are given some kind of conventional validity, having observed a basis of parts. We could call a basis of imputation. Like I see my air purifier in front of me, this little black box that takes the pollen and stuff out of the air. So it has different parts. It has buttons and fans and plastic and shapes and so forth. A chariot has various parts. Those are the basis of giving the name air purifier or chariot or Subaru or whatever phenomena you're talking about, or person. In the case of the person, the parts are the 5 aggregates. The form aggregate, which is the body, the consciousness aggregate, feelings, discriminations, compositional factors, and so forth. So every phenomena that exists conventionally, let's say a person, has certain parts to it. It has let's say if you talk about the person, we're talking about the 5 aggregates that we can label Adriana or Judy or Alex or whatever. So dependent arising means that phenomena arise conventionally once having apprehended the basis of designation, the parts. You give a name to that or a concept to that. A concept arises in your mind. You don't have to say apple or air purifier or something, but when your mind perceives that and gives a concept or name to that, that constitutes the recognition of its conventional existence, just merely named to its parts. So I won't go more about that right now. In a course that's going to be coming up in a month or two, we're going to be going over I didn't bring upstairs the text by Lama Tsongkhapa, which Chukden Jimpa has recently translated, called, I'm not sure how he translated it, Illuminating the Intent or Illumination of the Intent. It's a text by Lama Tsongkhapa, his commentary to Chandrakirti's commentary to Nagarjuna's great treatise on wisdom. And in that text, in that course, which will last maybe a year or so, we will go into all of these other kinds of more arcane, more detailed things like the reasoning of dependent arising. Right now, it says with respect to the first, the selflessness of persons, there are many forms of reasoning. For instance, that of dependent arising has 3 essentials. So what that means is you realize 3 essential points, which we'll talk about in a second now when we talk about the 4 essential points in this case. When you talk about the 7-fold reasoning, which was especially renowned by Chandrakirti, talking about again, the selflessness of persons. There are 9 essentials and so forth. They are explained extensively in the scriptures of the great being, the Master Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa, in his great exposition of special insight and the small exposition of special insight. So what does that mean? we call the Lanrim Chemo. Have you heard of the Lanrim Chemo? Anyone? Alex, have you heard the Lanrim Chemo? Alex is the opposite of I. I have no hair. Alex has hair all over the place right now. There you go. Okay. So the Lanrim Chemo was Lama Tsongkhapa's great exposition on the stages of the path. And the last section of that, let's say the last section of the paramitas of the Bodhisattva path, is called Lakton Chemo, or the great exposition on Vipassana, or the great exposition on emptiness. So that's one of the great texts in the Galupa tradition that's said to be important to understand. He also wrote a slightly abbreviated form of that in his middling Lanrim. Here, I think it's called the small exposition. Actually, it's the middling Lanrim. Those of you who are interested, this is a text by Jeffrey Hopkins, Tsongkhapa's final exposition of wisdom. In one part of this book, it's the translation of the middling or the small. You can call it either. It's just in distinction from the great exposition of the Lanrim, sort of like the shorter version of that. This is a good resource. So the Lanrim Chemo and the great exposition of special insight was written in 1401. It was the first of Lama Tsongkhapa's great texts on emptiness. In maybe 6 years later, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote another text about the intricacies of emptiness that's considered one of the 5 great texts on emptiness in the Galupa tradition, called Lekshe Ningpo, or what did Robert Thurman, where's Paul? What did Robert call it?
The essence of eloquence.
Essence of eloquence, Lekshe Ningpo. So Drangne Lekshe Ningpo. Drangne means the interpretable and definitive, sutras, sort of an exposition on that. That's considered one of the great texts. Then 1 year later, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the Ocean of Reasoning, which is like huge text. This is a word commentary on Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, and Chandrakirti's exposition on that. These are texts that we'll talk about later in that other course. In 1418, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the Gompa Rapso, the illumination of the intent, or illuminating the intent, which is a commentary on Chandrakirti's take on Nagarjuna, on his what's called the meaning commentary. And finally, that's it. So five great texts: the Lanrim Chemo, or Lakton Chemo, the exposition, the great exposition of special insight, the small exposition of special insight, illumination of the intent, ocean of reasoning, and essence of eloquence. These are considered to be the 5 great texts if you want to understand emptiness in, it's said that, but if you know all of them, if you studied them, you know everything you need to know. Maybe there's a couple of other things, maybe from Uttara Tantra or some other things, but those are generally considered to be, if you know those, that's enough. You don't have to go more. So I've made my own little list for those of us who don't have the wherewithal right now to go into those big texts. The text that we're studying now, Practice of Emptiness, You have the PDF on your computer that we're reading. The key to the middle way, this is just a printed copy, but that was, we talked about that last time. This was composed by the present Dalai Lama, the 14th Dalai Lama. Very short, but many, many essential points, a little bit different than the practice of emptiness. Another very good short text is the Realizing Emptiness by Genlam Rinpa, which you can find on Snow Lion. Genlam Rinpa was a Lama who passed away some years ago. He was a teacher of Alan Wallace, especially about developing concentration. And this text, although very short, has many, many important points like we're finding in our Practice of Emptiness text. Another text I'd recommend, a little bit longer, by Geshe Tekchok, Insight into Emptiness. You can find from Wisdom Publications. So these are these are 4 texts, kind of like the 5 great texts of the Gelugpa. These are much more abbreviated and more accessible. So these the reasoning of dependent arising and the sevenfold reasoning are explained in these 2 texts of Lama Tsongkhapa on the exposition of special insight, the great and small. In the instructions for the practice of in the instruction for the practice that is transmitted from mouth to mouth, transmitting from mouth to mouth, the experience of the omniscient bearer of the chariot of this system, Lobsang Gyatso and his sons, we find an analysis based on 4 essentials. So what's that talking about? Lobsang Gyatso, I think I might have mentioned before, was a student of the first Dalai Lama. It's called Keduk Lobsang Gyatso. He was a principal teacher of the second Dalai Lama. So he was a student of the first Dalai Lama, who was kind of a student of Lama Tsongkhapa. And he was one of the holders of the Lamrim lineage. When we talk about the Lamrim lineage gurus up here in the tree of assembled gurus up above me, there's the Lamrim lineage. So he was the 57th holder of that. So he was a very important Gelugpa Lama, and he kind of standardized what we're calling the 4 essential points. Have you heard of the 4 essential points before? Sheila, have you heard? No? Okay. Alex, have you heard the 4 essential points?
No.
No? Okay. Who has heard? Someone put up their hand if they've heard of the 4 essential points before. Nadine has heard. Okay, so what is this talking about? When you're trying to establish emptiness or selflessness, that means prove that. How do you go about doing that? The first thing you have to do is recognize the object that you're trying to negate in selflessness. Why do I say negate? Well, emptiness or selflessness is what's called a negative phenomena. It's literally, you could call it more precisely, a non-affirming negative. It's just a recognition that something does not exist inherently. Let's say the self of the person. In order to establish that, you first have to recognize the object that you're negating. Because you're not negating the general conventional self. There is a conventional self. When we say there is no self, or the Buddha talked about selflessness, or no self, different ways that you can say that. He was not saying that there's no Sonny, no Larry, no Nadine, no Georgina or Georgine. He was saying that there is no, or George, in my case, there is no George, the way that it is appearing to my mind, the way that it has appeared to my mind all this life, and the way that phenomena have appeared to exist to us since beginningless time, is somehow existing from their own side. That is what is being negated or refuted in emptiness. It's called the object of negation or the object of refutation. Does that make sense? Barbara, you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Okay. So here it says, the first essential is to ascertain the way an innate conceiver of the I conceives I. The text actually, well, another way we could translate this is the way that the innate self-grasping grasps to the I. Here, Jeffrey translates as conceiver, but in the Tibetan text, I think it's saying zimpa, which means grasping also. So what does that mean? In our mind right now, when we think about ourself, there are various kinds of idea of what myself is. You know, I might say, I'm a man, I'm 76 going on 77. I'm still like a 6-year-old. You know, when you were a 6-year-old, someone said, "Oh, are you 5?" You said, "No, I'm 5.5." Right? So I'm 76, a little more than 76.5. So you might think, you know, I was a physicist, I am a monk, different kinds of things. I am, you know, I am heavy or I'm light, I am attractive, I'm unattractive, I'm smart, I'm dumb, different kinds of conceptions of what you are. But at the core of things, as the text, we'll go into more detail here, it will become more clear. At the core of things, there is an appearance to the mind, to our mental consciousness, of a self-identity that really has no, which really doesn't exist the way that it appears. You know, when we talk about reflections, you know, to a parakeet who sees its reflection in a mirror. You know that example. You know, almost seems like the parakeet thinks there's another parakeet outside there, right? I'm not sure if parakeets really think that, but you know, or a deer that sees its reflection in a pond as it bends over to drink some water. Reflections can appear to be have their own kind of existence, but they're actually devoid of that existence, right? They're just a reflection of something that is appearing before them in a mirror or in a pond or something. The first essential is to ascertain the way that the innate conceiver of the I conceives I, or the way that the innate self-grasping grasps to the I. So we're talking about my own self-identity here, not the identity of other people. In the text by Buddhapalita, who was one of the first commentators on Nagarjuna, he said in his text that's called Buddhapalita. Sometimes it's just called by his name. It's at the end of the 7th chapter. He says, "All phenomena are selfless." all phenomena are selfless. They don't have a self. And the commentary says, when analyzing the selflessness of the person, if both the self that is the validly existent person, or the conventionally existent person, and the self that is the non-existent object negated, if they are not intimately identified, it is like sending out an army, dispatching an army without knowing where the enemy is, or like shooting an arrow without having sought the target. This is a very important point in Lama Tsongkhapa's exposition of emptiness, which is accepted by a lot of the Tibetan schools. Some of them have a little bit different take on this. Generally, what we're saying is that in order to negate some kind of self of persons that doesn't really exist, you have to identify it. How can you identify it if it doesn't exist? Good question, huh, Kristen? You're nodding, you're thinking? Well, it appears to our mind to exist. When I say appears, it doesn't mean visual appearance. There seems to be a sense of I, very vibrant in the depth of our mind when you get rid of other thoughts. Okay, let's go a little bit further, reading. When analyzing the selflessness of persons, if both the self that is the validly existent person, or in other words, the conventionally existent person that does exist, the mere I, and the object and the non-existent object negated are not intimately identified, it is like dispatching an army without knowing where the enemy is, and so forth. So what does that mean? The non-existent object negated. So what is occurring is that there's an appearance of an I to the mind. The appearance of that I doesn't correspond to something that really exists. You have to say the appearance exists. That's clear, because it does appear, the appearance. But that's not the problem. The mind apprehending that appearance to the mind of an I identity, myself, very, very subtle kind of I. The mind that's apprehending it, since it has apprehended that a sense of I since beginningless time, not the I of this lifetime, the I of this lifetime has a certain identity of, based on these aggregates, but there has been a continuity of self since beginningless time, and in whatever realm we're born in, as an animal or as an insect, as a cockroach, as a god, we've always had a sense of selfhood, self, me, I, and that sense of I doesn't correspond to reality. Okay. There is a famous quotation here from Shantideva's Bodhisattva Charyavatara coming next. Shantideva is engaging in the Bodhisattva deeds. Bodhisattva Charyavatara, chapter 9, verse 140. You can look at your translations and see if it's translated slightly differently there. I'm using the translation that Jeffrey Hopkins used in his text, The Final Exposition. It was slightly different wording than in the Practice of Emptiness. The non-existence, without making contact with the thing imputed, the non-existence of that thing is not apprehended. So what does that mean? You might say, well, isn't the conventional I imputed? It's merely imputed. Here, when it's talking about without making contact with the thing imputed, it's referring to the object of negation, the sense of an I within our consciousness that our mind is believing. Without making contact with the thing imputed, the non-existence of that thing is not apprehended. It can't be apprehended. So you have to recognize that which you are negating. Well, what you're negating is something that doesn't exist, right? But what does exist is the appearance of that I. So you have to identify that appearance of the I to the mind, and the way that the mind is believing it to exist. It's assenting to that appearance. Do you know what I mean by assenting? In a parliament or something, assent means you go along with something, right? The I is appearing to our consciousness on a very subtle level. And there is part of our mind that is apprehending that appearance and believing or assenting to the way it appears to exist, as though existing from its own side. Does that make sense? Okay. The commentary continues, if an image of an object negated, so here now it's talking about the mental image. This is what when we're saying the I appears to the mind, the I appears to the mind as a kind of mental image, not like a little body, with arms and everything, but some kind of sense of the I is, there is a mental image of that within our mind. Things that we imagine don't have to necessarily exist, right? Some things you can remember or imagine, like your mother's face, or vacation you took or something like that. Those mental images can be factually concordant. They're not the actual thing itself, but they could accord with reality. Other kinds of images to our mind can be fanciful. They can be not accord with reality. Like, for instance, the imagination of the horns of a rabbit. Alex, have you ever seen the horns of a rabbit?
No.
No. Do rabbits have horns? I don't know. There might be.
Only a jackalope.
Yeah, the mythological jackalope, right? I think I mentioned some of the other courses. Geshe Tekchok, who taught us once, when he was teaching tenets, we'd often talk about the horns of a rabbit as an example of something that doesn't exist. You can have an imagination of that, but it doesn't accord to reality. Like the inherently existent I that appears to our mind. It's kind of like the horns of a rabbit. How does that occur? Well, maybe on a foggy morning, you get up, you look out the window, you see a rabbit outside, and its ears are standing up. And because it's not very clear, you think, oh, those are horns. You have an idea, you talk about the horns of a rabbit, but there is no such thing. There are no such things, or there's no such thing as the horn of a rabbit, horns of a rabbit. If an image of the object negated does not appear well to the mind, this is a commentary on Shantideva's text, the meaning of the selflessness that negates it cannot be ascertained. It means cannot be realized. You have to first apprehend how the I is appearing to the mind, and understand how the mind is believing that there is really an I that has been offended or has been pleased or something. I just had the other day, I was misreading my bank statement. I was looking at this computer I was talking about earlier that was sent to me, and I thought, oh, they charged me $200 more than it actually cost. I have the receipt for what it was supposed to cost. And there was a sort of indignation in my mind. I have been cheated or something. Turns out that I misread the statement. But anyway, the image of the object negate, if an image of an object negated does not appear well to the mind, the meaning of the selflessness that negates it cannot be ascertained, cannot be realized. So in order to realize the selflessness of the person, you have to first see how the person, the I in this case, is appearing to the mind. Okay, this is called, this is the first essential point, ascertaining the object of negation. And it's not talking about, it's talking about, in the text here, it's talking about the innate conceiver of the I, innate conceiver of the I. So what does that mean? That means different than the intellectually formed conception of the I. I am a man, I'm a woman, I am a scholar, I'm a nurse, I'm a mother, I'm a father, whatever. I'm a monk. All of those are intellectually generated conceptions or conceivers of the I. Here we're talking about something innate or inborn that has existed since beginningless time, continuity of grasping to inherent existence that has existed since beginningless time. So when we talk about innate, that is opposed to intellectually formed. Maybe someone has told you the self is permanent, partless, and independent. If you believe some Vedic traditions, the I is permanent, partless, and independent. That's not an innate conception of the I, that the I is permanent, or that the I is partless, or the I is independent. Those are intellectually constructed forms. But there is an innate form of the I, innate grasping to the I, that appears without any kind of intellectual knowledge or ignorance. It's just grasping to the I. If an image of the object negated does not appear well to the mind, the meaning of selflessness that negates it cannot be ascertained. Therefore, when a selflessness of persons is presented, the word person refers to the nominally and validly existent person that is common beings such as Arya beings, superiors, within the 6 types of migrators. Do you know the 6 types of migrators? Snehi, do you know what the 6 types of migrators are?
The ones that go through the 6 realms? Like
What
from
are the 6 realms? What are the 6 realms?
The hell realms, the hungry ghost realms, the animal realms, the human realms, demigods, and the gods.
Yeah, you can say that. So the 6 types of migrators that are migrating through these 6 realms. There's also form and formless realms, but that is common beings, ordinary beings who have not realized emptiness, and superior beings. Here, superior is a way of translating Arya, or noble beings, those who have realized emptiness within the 6 types of migrators, 6 migrations, and the 3 vehicles, the hearers, solitary realizer, and bodhisattvas. They are all persons, nominally existent, conventionally existent, merely imputedly existent. The person's mode of abiding as if able to establish itself in its own right without being imputed by thought is called self, or is called inherent existence. So the way that, who else is here? Zeynep, I don't see people say Zeynep, or Jackie, or Poon King, who I see her field of flowers there. The way that the way that you exist is simply conventionally existent. Zeynep or Jackie or Poon King or whoever is merely imputed or designated, just a name designated to your aggregates, to your parts, you can say, like the parts of a chariot, the wheel, the rim, the base, the reins and everything. You impute chariot to those parts in the same way you impute or designate Jackie, Zeynep, Poon King to the 5 aggregates. That's the only Zeynep, Jackie, Poon King that exists conventionally. It doesn't exist inherently. It's just a name that we give to that, and that is said to be sufficient to constitute the person. Any other kinds of ideas who you are, you could talk about my arm, my leg, but that's not you. There's a sense of just the name you given to this collection of parts that does exist, as opposed to that conventionally existent person that does exist, that's merely imputed, merely designated. The person's mode of abiding as if able to establish itself in its own right without being imputed by thought or by word is called self or inherent existence. So this is the object that we're interested in here, the object of negation, establishing the object of negation. This, not the conventionally existent self, which does exist. You're not negating that. You're negating some kind of accretion, some kind of imagination of the self, which arises because of propensities in our minds since beginningless time to assent to this appearance. There is an appearance of the I. Again, it doesn't mean a visual appearance, but some sense of that appears to your mind, the sense of I. And we believe it. We assent to that. We grasp to that. Further, the innate conceiver of I, or the innate grasping to the I, which conceives of I based on the nominally existent person, is of 3 types. So what is, that sounds a little more complicated. Talking about 2 persons here. The conventionally existent person, or nominally existent person. You see in parentheses there, it says nominally existent person. It means imputedly existent person, which is the only person that does exist. It is the conventionally existent person. Okay. So what does that mean? On the basis of apprehending, first of all, a sense of I which is not exaggerated, that is not thought of as being inherent existence, just apprehending the imputedly existent I, the conventional I, which is just merely designated to your parts. On the basis of that, the mind exaggerates. Well, let's say it appears that that I, as soon as you give the name I, you say Paul. As soon as you say Paul, it appears to your mind that there must be something there from the side of Paul that is existing by itself. Not just that you've given the name Paul to something, and that not accepting that that would be sufficient, as though there's something existing from its own side. So further, the innate conceiver of I, or the innate grasping to I, which grasps or conceives of I based on the nominally existent person is of three types. So based on just the merely imputed person, merely imputed Ariana, I, when I think of her or when she thinks of herself, they're both called selves of persons. If I conceive of herself as an outside person looking at her, thinking about her, or if she thinks about herself, those are both called selves of person. There is a conventionally existent person, merely designated person. On the basis of that, the mind conceives of it as being inherently existent, existing from its own side, not simply a name given to it. So this innate conceiver of I is of three types. The intellect or mind which correctly conceives I. This would mean correctly knowing that Adriana is merely imputed. The intellect which correctly conceives I and which exists in a person who has generated the Madhyamaka view in his or her mental continuum. Mental continuum means mind stream, right? In your continuum of mind. In your mind, if you have realized emptiness, if you have an understanding of emptiness, that the I is merely imputed, there is a mind, or here it says intellect, which correctly conceives I, correctly conceives that Ron is merely imputed to his aggregates, that Hillary is merely imputed to her aggregates. When you get completely, bunged up, like my bank statement when I think I have been cheated or something, there's a sense of I. You remember there's no such I like that. The I is merely imputed to these aggregates. That can have a very calming effect. So there are three types of innate conceiver which conceives of the I. So there's an innate conceiver, which is a mind or intellect which correctly conceives I as being merely imputed, and which exists in a person who has generated the Madhyamaka view in his or her mental continuum. This consciousness correctly conceives the I to be only designated to its basis of designation, mind and body, or another way, if you elaborate mind and body, say the five aggregates, merely designated to the five aggregates. Do you have that kind of conceiver of the I now? David, do you have that kind of conceiver? David Mackless? No? You don't want to answer?
I believe so.
Well, yeah, it says here, which exists in the continuum of a person who has generated the Madhyamaka view in their mental continuum. So if you've generated the Madhyamaka view, you may have that conception. Otherwise, maybe it's a little, right now, maybe for most of us, even if we've heard teachings on emptiness before, that this kind of conceiver of the I may not be so distinct, but it may be there. In the minds of people who have not been educated in the Madhyamaka view, let's say the view of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, that phenomena are merely imputed, in the minds of people who have not heard this or thought of this or considered this, there will not be this kind of I that correctly conceives the I to be only designated. Okay. Second kind of innate conceiver, the innate misconceiver of an I. This is what we all have, all sentient beings have. Well, all sentient beings who have not become arhats yet. The innate misconceiver of an I, which is qualified by being inherent existent. So there's an appearance to the mind of I as though it's inherently existent, existing from its own side, not merely designated. And the mind which assents to that or grasps to that as true, right? That is the innate misconceiver of an I, which is qualified by being inherently existent. You're conceiving the I to be inherently existent. This consciousness is to be overcome through its antidote here on this occasion in the path of wisdom. This is the object that has to be overcome. This grasping has to be overcome. So two things that have to be overcome. There is an appearance of an I as inherently existent, and there's a belief in that. If you've realized emptiness, selflessness, you can overcome the grasping to that. So that misconceiver, the innate misconceiver of an I that is qualified as being inherently existent, that misconceiver can be slowly eradicated over the course of meditation on emptiness again and again. But when you arise from that meditation, the I still appears inherently because of imprints from beginningless time. So that is, that appearance will be eventually overcome, but it is not overcome at first, because when you, even when someone has realized emptiness, when they arise from that meditation on emptiness, it still seems that phenomena and the self appear to be inherently existent, but by the force of having realized in your meditation on emptiness that that appearance is false, that it doesn't accord with reality, you can have what's called the illusion-like meditation on emptiness. When you arise from meditation, and the meditative equipoise on emptiness. In that case, all that's appearing to your mind is a vacuity, the lack of an inherently existent I. When you arise from that and the I appears to exist again inherently, you can kind of chuckle and say, oh my gosh, holy mackerel. I know that doesn't exist, but there it is, appearing there so vibrantly. So the person who has that kind of understanding is said to be practicing the illusion-like meditation on emptiness. It doesn't mean meditation in the sense that you have to be sitting down with your eyes partially closed, in meditation posture, but even just keeping that continuity in mind that this doesn't exist the way that it appears. Making sense so far? Who's confused? No one's confused? David's confused. Ron's laughing. Ron, are you confused?
All the time.
Okay, that's good. I am too. Okay, so what I mentioned before, I misspoke in one of the previous lectures about who is it, Newton, having read Principia Mathematica, which he actually composed, he actually read a text by Descartes on geometry. I don't know how you say it in French, again and again. So he said in some of his writings, he read a couple of pages, he didn't understand anything, he'd start again, he understood a little bit, again and again. If you read this material again and again, go over it again and again, it will start to make sense to you. And you can be like Newton at the end, once he had gone through this text many, many, many times, read it through, and finally understood all the details by the force of making connections, hearing something once, then when you go back to read that section again, you start to make some connections that you didn't make when you read it the first time or thought about it the first time. Okay, so it's not surprising that we'd be confused at first. So we're talking about three kinds of innate conceiver of the I. So naturally occurring conceiver of the I. One only occurs the first one only occurs in the mind of someone who is trained in the Madhyamaka, and realizes that the I is merely imputed. The second is the general kind of misconceiver of the I, which is the general grasping to the I. The third one is a conventional valid cognizer. And those of you who studied, our tenets and our mind and mental factors and so forth, when we talked about valid cognizers and so forth, the conventional valid cognizer, which establishes the existence of I. So this is different than the first one, the intellect which correctly conceives the I and which exists in the person who has generated the Madhyamaka view, which can correctly conceives the I to be only designated. That's the first one. Now we're talking about something else. Conventional valid cognizer, which establishes the existence of I. What does this mean? This consciousness exists, for example, in the continua, usually plural of continuum is continua, right? Here's continuums. This consciousness exists, for example, in the continua of those common beings like ourselves, like Ron, who's confused, and I don't mean that pejoratively, or David, who's confused. This consciousness exists, for example, in the continua of those common beings whose mental continua are not affected by systems of tenets and who thus do not differentiate nominal imputation, mere imputation by name. Nominal means giving a name to something, right? Nominal imputation. To impute a name is nominal imputation, means say Karen, point to these aggregates to say this is Karen. That's a nominal imputation. Someone who does not differentiate between nominal imputation and inherent existence. So, for instance, you're what's it called? A blacksmith. You're making horseshoes, and someone says, "Where's the horse?" And without thinking about it, you say, "Oh, over there." At that point, that person who's not trained in Madhyamaka necessarily, who's not trained in, is not being affected by philosophical ideas of what a horse is. He just says, "There's a horse," pointing over there. There's a horse. Where am I here? This consciousness exists, for example, in the continua of those common beings whose mental continua, or continuums, if you like, are not affected by systems of tenets. Could be affected by systems of tenets in general, but not at this time. And who thus do not differentiate nominal imputation and inherent existence. They're just thinking, in this case, the I is not qualified with being nominally imputed or inherently existent. You're just thinking horse, or if you're talking about I, right? Makes sense? This is what the world, okay, Adriana's, this is, I can't remember where Adriana's from, Colombia? You're from?
No, I'm in Colorado, more or less, but I'm from Mexico,
Mexico. So it's Mexico.
more or less.
Yes, that's also Italian. So let's read a little further. So the next quite a bit here is in parentheses. This is commentary by Jeffrey Hopkins and Geshe Rapton on the fifth Dalai Lama's idea here. So it's saying, though uneducated common beings, it doesn't mean like you didn't go to grade school, uneducated. It means not educated in philosophical tenets. Though uneducated common beings do not propound inherent existence or nominal imputation. If you ask your friends at the bowling alley or at the restaurant, you know, is this cup nominally imputed or inherently existent? They won't know what you're talking about, right? It's just a cup, right? Though uneducated common beings do not propound inherent existence or nominal imputation, the I, so here mainly we're talking about the selflessness of persons now, especially with respect to oneself. The I does appear to them to be inherently existent. It appears that way. And because they sometimes assent to that appearance without reasoning, they grasp to that, they also have a conception of inherently existent I of the second type. Remember, the second type above was the innate misconceiver. So uneducated people sometimes grasp to that sense of I, but they, like other beings, even including those who have been educated in wrong systems of tenets, have consciousnesses that do not engage in conceptions of inherent existence. That is to say, the I is appearing, but they're not grasping to it strongly. It's sort of dormant. It's because it's not vibrant, not like the blacksmith who's pointing to the horse. You know, where's the horse? It's over there. He's not thinking there's an inherently existent horse over there. If someone were to say to that person, your horse has been stolen, suddenly the grasping to horse will be more vibrant. They may have a misconceiver grasping to the inherently existent horse or the inherently existent I. They, like other beings, even including those who have been educated in wrong systems of tenets, have consciousnesses that do not engage in conceptions of inherent existence. There's some instances like that. It's just sort of like, because it's not vibrant in one's mind, the grasping to that. It's appearing to be inherently existent, but you're not paying attention to that appearance. You're not grasping to it. Therefore, it is not being said that all the conceivers of an I in the continuum of a falsely educated person are wrong. Someone who's believing in, Vedic, the ancient Indian system that the I is permanent, partless, and independent, or Christian, or other kinds of things that believe there's a real soul, right? This is what's, it's not being pejorative here. Therefore, it is not being said that all the conceivers of the I in the continuum of a falsely educated person, that would mean people who are educated in Christianity and believe that there is a real soul. The implication of that is that they are grasping to that idea of the self as being inherently existent, although they don't think of the term inherent existence. It is not being said that all conceivers of the I in the continuum of a falsely educated person are wrong, or that all conceivers of the I in the continuum of an uneducated person are right, because people who are not educated in tenets also, they can also grasp to that inherently existent I. Rather, both the uneducated and the falsely educated have both the second and third types. Sometimes they misconceive the I. Sometimes they're just assenting to the mere horse or the mere, there's Jane, or without thinking anything dynamic, there's Adriana, there's Georgine. Also, the falsely educated and the uneducated occasionally have the third type of consciousness, conceiving of an I, which is not qualified by being either nominally imputed or inherently existent. This is the one where you just say, there's the horse over, yeah, where's the horse? Over there. Where's the coffee? Oh, it's on the shelf. You're not grasping to that. If you're like David and me, and you're very attached to coffee, then that there might be grasping at that point. But if you just, you're not so attached, the innate misconceiver may be dormant at that time. The coffee will still appear as inherent existent, but you're not grasping to it at that point. So the falsely educated and the uneducated occasionally have the third type of consciousness, conceiving of an I, which is not qualified by being either nominally imputed or nor inherently existent. It's just I would say conventionality. However, neither the falsely educated nor the uneducated can distinguish between an imputedly existent I and an inherently existent I. Neither of them can differentiate. Most of us, unless you've been educated in the Madhyamaka view that phenomena are merely imputed and that they appear to be inherently existent, unless you've educated in that extent, you can't differentiate between an imputedly existent I and an inherently existent I. Making sense? Adriana's. Doris.
Well, I was going to wait and ask this question, but it's right after you saying that. I'm looking at the first definite or the first type, and these are supposed to be innate. So is the first type, that correct intellect, is that an innate view?
It can become innate.
It can become
innate. Yeah,
Gotcha.
It's not, when you're first at our point right now, when you're just introduced to the Madhyamaka view, it won't necessarily be innate. It will be more intellectually formed right now in us. Oh, that ice cream that I'm so attached to, I don't have to be attached because it's just imputedly existent, merely imputed by mind. That's not necessarily an innate conceiver of the I, but it can become an innate conceiver of the I once you have a realization of emptiness.
So it's not like it's innate and we have to uncover it.
Right. Yeah, it's not innate. It's not it's not innate in the sense that our self-grasping since beginningless time that we have right now is innate.
Gotcha.
It's something that can become innate once you've realized emptiness, I believe.
Okay, I see the distinction. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So, however, neither the falsely educated nor the uneducated can distinguish between an imputedly existent I and an inherently existent I. Oh, this is so worthwhile thinking about going back and forth. both must become educated in the Madhyamaka view of non-inherent existence and imputed existence to overcome their innate tendency to assent to the false appearance of the I as if inherently existent or covering its basis of designation. Both must become educated in the Madhyamaka view. So the Madhyamaka view is saying that phenomena appear to be inherently existent, and our minds assent to that generally with that innate misconceiver, believing that that really exists the way that it appears. Remember the example I've given in other courses. There was a lady in India I told about who she wanted to go to the Hilton Hotel for the buffet. I used to go to the Hilton in Delhi when I was teaching there. They had that was my night out. I would go to the, what is it called? The salad buffet. So the regular buffet might have been a couple of hundred rupees, but the salad buffet, I think, was 24 rupees, which was like 30 cents or something. Even that was a lot. So I would take the bus to the Hilton. I'd go to that. She wanted to go to the Hilton in order to go to maybe the buffet. But she was in old clothes, having traveled around India. She had her good clothes in her rucksack. So she went to a cheap hotel first, changed into her good clothes, nice dress. She went over to the Hilton now to go there as a second hotel. And as she goes up, she sees out of the corner of her eye another person in the same dress, right? Not a sari, it was like a Western dress. And she looked, and then she saw, as she looked, she recognized that it was her own reflection in one of those big glass doors. Right? It was her own reflection. It wasn't something outside there, inherently existent other person. Both must become educated in the Madhyamaka view of non-inherent existence and imputed existence to overcome their innate tendency to assent to the false appearance. So she was assenting to the false appearance that there was an inherently existent person over there, which was just a reflection in the big glass door. Have you ever noticed that? These big hotels with huge glass doors and the right lighting? Okay. Further, a tight, firm mind, thinking I, or thinking of I, exists in our mental continua, in our mental continuums, our continua, on all occasions of sleep and waking. So it's there, but it's not necessarily manifest. However, like a mirror and an image of your face, in that the presence of the mirror yields a clear image of the face, when you meet with conditions of happiness and suffering, the mind thinking I manifests very strongly. So I gave the example earlier of my misreading my bank statement. That was, it looked like they had charged me $200 or $300 more than was on the invoice. But it was my misreading. It was in, how these things on the bank statement. Sometimes the last thing that you paid included some other things, not only the price of the computer. When you meet with conditions of happiness and suffering, the mind thinking I manifests very strongly. So this is one of the special techniques used to recognize the object of negation, because the way that the I appears and the way that the mind is grasping to it, assenting to it, misconceiving it, is very, very subtle and is obscured by other thoughts in our mind. But if you can cause some dynamic situation to arise, like strong feeling of happiness or suffering, when you meet with conditions of happiness and suffering, the mind thinking I manifests very strongly. So there is appearance of the I all the time. The mind is not always grasping at it, like that third type, just sort of just there. When the I appears very vividly because of relationship to something you've experienced that's very pleasurable or unpleasurable, suffering, that grasping to that manifests very strongly. Also, on occasions when such conditions are not encountered, it is a little unclear. So if you just sit in meditation, you try to recognize the object of negation, the appearance of an inherently existent I in your mind, and the way that your mind is grasping to it. They're two different things, right? The appearance and the belief in that, the grasping to that. Not very clear, because other thoughts are in your mind. Sometimes if you meditate on Mahamudra, like we did in previous courses, you have a very clear mind, the I can appear a little more clearly, but still not so distinctly. You need to have some kind of juice, some sign of, sort of like punching someone in the shoulder to wake them up, like something very strongly pleasurable or something very suffering. Most instructors on the view nowadays, this is in the time of the fifth Dalai Lama, have not analyzed whether such is manifest or not. What is talking about here? What is manifest or not? Snehi, are you following? Are you multitasking there?
I'm trying to follow, but I'm very confused.
Okay, so most instructors on the view nowadays have not analyzed whether such is manifest or not. Such refers to the mind thinking I, thinking I is truly existent. They don't analyze that. They speak about practice relying on impoverished words, such as just saying, the way that the innate conceiver of an I conceives of the I. They don't talk about how to generate, how to notice that. We say that there is a appearance of I in our mental continuum, and there is a mind that is reacting to that. When it misconceives it, it's grasping it to be true. But of the first kind of innate conceiver, we talk about one that's been educated in the Madhyamaka view, has some kind of understanding of that, and that is not grasping to that. It's recognizing that it's appearing, but that it doesn't exist the way that it appears. These other instructors speak about practice relying on impoverished words, such as just saying, the way that the innate conceiver of an I conceives I. What does that mean, impoverished words? It means it doesn't really give you an idea how the mind is grasping to that. The way that the innate conceiver of an I conceives the I. Such instruction does not at all concord with the essentials, like pointing an accusing finger at someone whose face is not well seen and saying, this is yesterday's thief, and so forth. Pointing to someone without not recognizing them clearly, recognizing that they were the person that was there before, just saying that's the thief of yesterday, and so forth. Therefore, you first need a clear notion of happiness or suffering that was actually caused by someone else. Let's say someone has accused you. Jackie, you stole my tea. You stole my Chinese tea. Some accusation. I'll get to you in a second. so that, you know, that might cause some anguish. What do you mean? I didn't steal your tea. If not, you should recall a former occurrence of such to the point where it appears clearly to the mind. You know, sometime when you were accused, or there was a very strong feeling of happiness or suffering. Try to recall how the I was appearing at that time, and how if you could recall that, how one part of your mind was reacting to that appearance. Did it really believe that there was a real I? For example, if someone falsely accused you of being a thief, you stole my tea, the thought, I robbed George of his tea, does not exist in your mind. Nevertheless, thinking that he accused you of such a theft, you sometimes have a strong hatred for that person. Please, Jackie, don't hate me. At that time, this I, which is the object of the accusation of theft, you know, you, when I say you, Jackie stole my tea, you're thinking I did not steal the tea. That's the object of the accusation of theft, and which is held firmly and tightly in the center of the heart, seems even as if it can be seen and grasped with the hand. It becomes more vibrant because other thoughts are dispelled from your mind, all the other things that can disturb you. And this thing becomes very vibrant. It's like during an eclipse of the sun, you can start to see the stars in the sky, which are obscured when the sunlight is there. You know what I'm talking about? Have you ever seen an eclipse of the sun? The stars you can start to appear. Otherwise, when the sun is brightly there, you don't notice the stars. They're there, they're appearing in the sky, but they're overcome by that. So when other thoughts are vibrant in your mind, like the sun of other thoughts, you don't notice how the innate misconceiver of the I is appearing. At that time, this I, which is the object of accusation of theft and which is held firmly and tightly in the center of the heart, seems even as if it can be seen and grasped with a hand. Similarly, if another person caused you to achieve a desired aim, someone was kind to you, got you a good deal, gave you a discount or something, and you reflect that such and such help was rendered the I, they helped me, they're so kind, which the I, which is the object helped, appears forcefully from the center of the heart. Jackie, so your question, hopefully not about tea.
Thank you, Venerable. I would like to ask you to, okay, so the 3 types of innate conceivers of I. The first time, my understanding, and please let me know if my understanding is correct. My understanding of the first type is when the person sees the object or the person or any phenomenon as merely imputed. And so that means this person has gotten the Madhyamaka view of all phenomena are empty of inherent existence, and they have that realization. So am I correct on that? Number one.
But in addition, they have a correct understanding of that, in that what does appear is conventionally existent and is merely imputed upon that. Here it said, the intellect which correctly conceives I and which exists in a person who has generated the Madhyamaka view in his or her mental continuum. This consciousness correctly conceives the I to be only designated to the basis of designation.
Okay.
Or, you know, the I to the body.
Okay. So for that person, both the appearance and the mind grasping of the object or I do not exist. I mean, do not exist to that person. That means that person only see the object or I as merely imputed. So they don't even see the image of that person or the appearance.
No. The I will still, the I would still appear to them as inherently existent.
Yeah.
But because they're, say for instance, the example I've given of Santa Claus coming down the stairs, you know, Paul Hackett comes down the stairs dressed as Santa Claus, and the kids think it's Santa Claus, but the adults in the room hopefully know that that's Paul, right? It still appears to be Santa Claus, but they know it's not Santa Claus.
But they know that.
The children who are like the uneducated or miseducated, they think that's really Santa Claus. They're jumping up and down.
Yes. So the difference between that first type and the second type is that the first type, out of meditation, they still see that as merely imputed. Whereas the second type of people, then they only see that during meditation equipoise on emptiness. But when they arise from that meditation, they will also see things as, you know, conventionally, and cannot directly see that as.
I'm not sure using the number. So the first type was correct. So that's the one who's educated in the Madhyamaka view. So that person, to their mind, phenomena still are appearing as inherently existent, but they know that they are merely imputed. So they are not assenting to that grasping. They are subduing that grasping, that's believing in the I as inherently existent, and that because that grasping is not functioning, you know, it's subdued, or if they're an Arya being, it's eliminated to some extent. Because of that, their minds are not prone to exaggerate and develop attachment and anger and so forth.
So that means the first type of people, they are those who have directly realized.
Not necessarily directly realized.
So that means.
So let me finish up a little bit more, because we just past 8:30, and those of you who have some more questions, you'll wait until we do the dedication, because some people might want to move on. And same, Georgine, if you'll be patient, I'll call on both of you. So let me just read a little bit further. In reliance on your cultivating either of these two modes, the manifest mind thinking I causes other coarse thoughts to become dormant. The two modes meaning remembering something that was suffering or something that was pleasant. And in reliance on cultivating either of these, the manifest mind thinking I becomes strong and causes other coarse thoughts to become dormant. It's kind of like the eclipse of the sun, right? All of this sunlight that are like these other thoughts, they become dormant to some extent. And you should allow the innate conceiver of I to increase in strength. So when you watch how the I is appearing, you know, remembering something that was pleasant or suffering, and you should watch, what does it say? You should allow the innate conceiver of I to increase in strength. The innate conceiver of the I is not the appearance of the I, but the mind that's reacting to that appearance, believing it or not. At this point, the way that the mind conceives the I should be analyzed. How the mind is reacting to that appearance of the I because of pleasure or pain. It is extremely difficult within one consciousness to analyze both the conception of an I and the way it is conceived. That is, the appearance of the I, difficult to at the same time to notice how the I is appearing and how you're believing it, whether your mind is believing, assenting to that or not. At this point, the way that the mind conceives the I should be analyzed. It is extremely difficult within one consciousness to analyze both the conception of an I and the way it is conceived. The first being the recognition of the I, how it's appearing, and the second being the recognition of its qualities of self-sufficiency and so forth. If the force of the analytical consciousness is too strong, the strength of the conception of I is destroyed and becomes unclear. So what we're trying to do is to, like if you go to the cemetery or you go to a haunted house or something, fear arises, like in the famous Tibetan practice of Chu. You go to the charnel ground, and because of the, spooky owls and, fear, and the corpses laying around, I arises, the appearance of I appears very strongly. That's why that practice, Chu, means, Chu actually means to slay or to cut. So it's the purpose of that is to recognize the object of negation, the I, and in so doing, in that, because it becomes very clear, you're able to analyze and cut the continuity of the grasping to that. I should be analyzed. It is extremely difficult within one consciousness to analyze both the conception of an I and the way it is conceived. The first being the recognition of the I, and the second being the recognition of the qualities of self-sufficiency and so forth that the mind
I found this on the web.
Okay, someone's doing a Google search or something, or ask Siri something. If the force of the analytical consciousness is too strong, the strength of the conception of I is destroyed and becomes unclear. So I'm going to leave it there. My suggestion is that we will meet again in 2 weeks, because next week the Shantideva Center has some other, unless I'm mistaken, right?
That's
Next week
correct.
we're off.
Yes, that's
And
correct.
so in 2 weeks, so these 2 weeks, see if you can go over this material and try to stimulate that appearance to your mind of the I. Worthwhile, first of all, to do some breathing meditation, meditate on the clear light nature of your mind, so the mind becomes somewhat, the other thoughts become less vibrant. And then to stimulate, remember something that was extremely embarrassing or suffering or fearful, or something which was extremely gratifying or pleasurable, and watch how these two things, the appearance of the I, and analyze also at that point how the mind is reacting to that. Is the mind believing that? When you're under the control of anger or attachment, usually the anger and attachment has been generated because you were believing in that I strongly. If you've analyzed somewhat and you realize that I doesn't exist the way that it's appearing, the anger, attachment, fear, and so forth can dissipate. So see if you, in these next 2 weeks, if you can do some practice, read this next section where it says, how should the analysis be done? Several more paragraphs, and we will continue then. Okay. So before we go to questions, we're gonna do a short dedication. I forgot. Sunny, can you put? Yeah, we go. So think during this period we have created some virtuous actions, whether they be the collection of merit or the collection of wisdom. And if we make a very strong wish or determination that that karma ripen in some particular ways, it can help to direct it to ripen in that way. Due to these virtues, due to this virtue, these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that very enlightened state. So thinking that's what I'm dedicating these merits. May they ripen in such a way that they bring about my spiritual development from life to life, up to and including enlightenment, from which state I can effortlessly and spontaneously benefit all sentient beings without any error whatsoever. May the supreme precious bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. So dedicating, in a sense, although this is a prayer, can think of as dedication. Due to these merits, may the bodhicitta, which I've already laid some groundwork for, increase and not decrease, and may it increase evermore. Thank you very much. So those of you who have some other activities, please feel free to leave. Those of you like Jackie and Georgina already have their hands up, want to listen to some more questions, and Doris also. So Jackie, you finish up a little bit more. What did that?
So yeah, thank you, Venerable. Thank you so much. So the first type of innate conceiver of I is for those people who understand Madhyamaka view and realize the conventional reality and also the ultimate reality, and not necessarily those people are that they have the direct realization of emptiness. Is that correct?
I believe they don't, I may be wrong, but I believe they do not necessarily have a direct realization of emptiness. It doesn't say that here.
Yeah.
It seems to imply that due to the force of developing this familiarity that phenomena are merely imputed, that can become an innate kind of state of mind. But I will check into that for you, okay?
Yes. And then the second type of people are those who have innate misconceiver. They are innate misconceiver of I. That means they see everything is inherently existent. That means they have no idea or no understanding of Madhyamaka view of emptiness.
Well, they may have some familiarity, but they didn't understand it properly. They haven't familiarized with it, or they're completely oblivious to it. And it's not as though they think the phenomena are inherently existent. Oh, I am inherently existent. They don't even know that term, inherent existence.
Yes.
But their mind is believing that there is something that accords with how it's appearing to the mind. How it's appearing to the mind seems to be not merely imputed, but seems to be self-established, inherently existent. So the mind is assenting to that.
Yes. And so how is the second type of people different from the third type of?
Oh, big difference. First type of people are not assenting to that appearance. They're not going along with that appearance. They're recognizing that the I is merely imputed and doesn't have any existence from its own side. Whereas the second kind of innate misconceiver, the innate conceiver, which is misconceiving, is actually believing in that inherent existence of the I.
I'm sorry, my question, I didn't pronounce it correct clearly. I mean, I meant to ask what's the difference between the second type and the third?
Oh, the
type.
third. We said
Yeah.
first and second. Okay. The
Yeah.
third type
Yeah,
is like say, just, right now, if someone says, where's the coffee? And you point over there. You're not thinking there's inherently you're not grasping to inherently existent coffee or imputedly existent coffee. Your
yes,
mind is just what we call, when we talk about, when Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna talked about what we call samvriti satya. So that usually we translate that as conventional truth or imputed, conventionally existent self, conventionally existent truth, or relatively existent. So it's just relative, without making a distinction that that's inherently existent, without not talking about intellectually thinking inherent existence, without grasping it as being inherently existent, just assenting to the mere appearance, which Chandrakirti, if you stay around for the course that will come in a couple of months, there's much discussion about this, that phenomena to the world, the world doesn't discriminate. This is kind of like talking about the worldly people. Don't discriminate between inherently existent or imputedly existent. They just think, horse, coffee, flower, whatever. It's only when their minds are involved in something where the ego becomes strong, that they grasp to these things, or something that's pleasurable or unpleasurable, that the mind grasps to these things as inherently existent. Let's leave that. If you have more question, send an email to me so that some of the other people have a chance to ask question, okay?
thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. So Jardine?
Thank you very much for the teaching, Venerable. It's clarifying a great deal for me. Thank you. You made mention, and there is mention in the text of, well, I guess there's not a mention in the text of the four essentials, but on page 7, the first essential is listed.
Yeah, it mentions all four essentials. You have to go down, it's sort of embedded in those paragraphs. For instance, so a little bit further, it says, this is the first essential in the cultivation of wisdom, ascertainment of the object, which is negated in the theory of selflessness. And then maybe several paragraphs beyond that, where is it? It's talking about the second essential, and then the third essential, and so forth. You'll find them in there if you read on and sort of underline when it talks about first essential and third essential point. So the first essential point is recognizing the object of negation. That's all we've talked about so far, and we haven't finished that. The second essential is ascertaining the pervasion. In this case, the pervasion means if the self existed inherently the way that it appears, it would either have to be inherently identical to the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. It would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different with the aggregates. The pervasion means there can't be a third case. It either, if the I were to be inherently existent, it would have to be inherently identical to the aggregates or inherently different from the aggregates. And the word inherently here has great import because that means absolutely one with the aggregates or absolutely different than the aggregates. So they would have no relationship with the aggregates. So that's called the second essential point. The third essential point is analyzing that it is not inherently one with the aggregates It's not inherently identical to the aggregates. The fourth essential point is that it is not inherently different than the aggregates. So you'll see that as you go along reading through the text. So on the basis of that, you analyze again and again. You recognize the I appears to be inherently existent. If it existed this way, it would have to be inherently one with the aggregates or inherently different than the aggregates. No other possibility. You exclude through your analysis that it could be inherently one with the aggregates through analysis. So that's out of the question. So then you might think, well, it might be inherently different than the aggregates. Then you see the fallacies involved in that. And the only alternative, after seeing that it is not inherently one with the aggregates, not inherently different than the aggregates, the only possibility is that it is not inherently existent. Because if it were inherently existent, it would have to be inherently identical to the aggregates, meaning there would be many I's as there are many aggregates or so forth, many fallacies. And if it were inherently different than the aggregates, it would have no connection with the aggregates at all, so that if someone stuck you with a needle in the arm, you would not think I was stuck, because the I is inherently different than the aggregates. So you can go, there are many, many reasons, as the text will see, you'll see it gives very tasty reasons to refute either of those possibilities. So 4 essentials, recognizing the object of negation, ascertaining the privation. If something is inherently existent, it would have to be inherently one with its parts or inherently different from its parts, let's say the aggregates. Then seeing that it's not inherently one with the parts, and subsequently seeing that it's not inherently different than the parts. Those are 4 essentials. Then, as a culmination of that, you recognize it's not inherently existent, because if it was inherently existent, it would have to be one of these 2. That's when you let go, and all that appears to your mind is the mere vacuity, the mere absence of what you were believing before. The mind that's grasping to that inherently existent I then becomes, sort of like starts to dissipate. And you're left in a state that's not grasping to the inherent existence any longer. All that appears to your mind is the mere vacuity, the mere absence of the inherently existent I that you were believing in before. But we'll go into more detail about that. We're still, this is like, when you're painting a wall, you put down the primer, first of all. Maybe you even have to put a second coat on before you put the final coat on. At first there's a lot of gaps. You put the first thing on, you wait a couple of hours, there's something that's not covering there and there. So right now we're only putting the first coat on. So there's a lot of doubts, what about this? What about that? So then as you think about it a little bit more, as you read more about it and you try to meditate on that, things will become a little more clearer. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Doris, do you have a question?
Thank you, Venerable.
Yeah.
Just going back to the last sentence that we read, it says, if the force of the analytical consciousness is too strong. So the inclusion of the word too is kind of confusing me, as if it's saying that we shouldn't analyze so strongly. Like if we analyze too strong, something happens. So what's the point here?
Well, say for instance, when we talked about penetrative insight, vipassana. Remember, first of all, you develop shamatha, tranquil abiding. Then it's as though you introduce analysis. If you try to analyze too strongly within that concentration, the concentration is lost. It's a little bit similar. Here, if you try to, because you're trying to keep 2 things in mind. You have to keep the appearance of the inherently existent I, which is just neutral. So it seems to be inherently existent. the appearance of that. And you have to also notice at the same time how the mind is reacting to that appearance. You have to see whether the kids are believing that Paul coming down the stairs is Santa Claus, or whether the adults believe that that's Santa Claus, or they believe it's Paul. You have to see in your own experience how your mind is reacting to that. Is it believing that? And generally it is. It's believing that innate misconceiver of the I is assenting to that. But if you try to push too strongly on that, the appearance of the I that you're analyzing sort of disappears. So you have to find a balance between the appearance of the I not disappearing and the mind recognizing how it is reacting to that appearance. You have to keep those two in the mind at the same time. So it's very difficult. So the great yogis who have experience of emptiness say that it's worthwhile, spending months, maybe years, in recognizing the object of negation. Then, once you've recognized that and it becomes very clear to your mind, you can recall that because you've become familiar with it. You no longer have to instigate it by remembering something pleasurable or suffering. You've gotten to the point where your mind is calm and you can keep that in mind. Then, very simple, just seeing that it's not, analyzing that it's not one with the aggregates, not different than the aggregates, not inherently one with the aggregates, not inherently different than the aggregates. You can realize emptiness maybe in one day. So the main point is recognizing the object of negation.
Gotcha.
Okay. Punking, last question.
Thank you.
Punking, is that those flowers in Singapore, or is that from somewhere else?
No, it's just a background. It's just a background, I feel.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, my question is that is the self-sufficient, substantial, existent self is
no, don't talk about that now. I will
innate,
answer your question about self-supporting substantial existence. Here we're gone beyond that.
Okay.
Now we're not talking about the
my
growth.
question. Sorry. Yeah, I'm just asking: is that an educated, wrong perception rather than the innate?
So there is no innate conception of the I as being permanent, partless, and independent. That's the grossest sense of I.
Yeah.
There is just an intellectually formed. For the
Right.
self-supporting, substantially existent person, there is both an intellectually formed and an innate version of that, but simply eliminating the innate misconception that the person is self-supporting, substantially existent is not sufficient to eliminate the delusions, because there's something subtler, the sense of an I being inherently existent, that still fuels the delusions. So realizing that the person is empty of being self-supporting, substantially existent, that's called the gross selflessness of persons, that does cause the delusions to go down. Those delusions that depend upon grasping at that self-supporting, substantially existent person, but not all delusions at all are eliminated, and that does not cause those delusions that depend upon grasping the self-supporting, substantially existent person to be ceased. There will not be a true cessation of them. The only way to have a true cessation of the afflictions is by realizing the emptiness of inherent existence.
It sounds like a view of the autonomous middle way school.
So the word autonomous has different meanings. So you have to be, when
No,
you talk about
autonomous,
so again, this is something that's not, we're not talking about that here. We're talking about something that's sort of like that was meant to be studied in tenets, you know, the view of the non-Buddhist schools, that only intellectually formed, that the person is permanent, partless, and independent. There's no innate conception that the person is permanent, partless, and independent. It's only intellectually formed by tenets. The sense of a self-supporting, substantially existent person, there is a kind of grasping to that, one kind which is intellectually formed, one which is innate. But even eliminating the innate misconception will not cause the afflictions to cease. So here the presumption here, when we're talking about the 6th chapter on wisdom, is that one already has gone beyond those others. We're only talking about the Prasangika point of view here, which is negating the inherently existent I. So I will try to address your questions. I've had some problems the last couple of days. You sent me an email. I'll try to get back to that. Let's end here. It's 9 o'clock. Some people have to go on. Thank you very, very much. The next 2 weeks until our next meeting, see if you can try to recognize the object of negation and follow through the text and see if you can have some experience of trying to analyze how the mind is apprehending that I. Okay.